Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniella Ferrari. I work in the Legal Advisory Services of the World Bank's Legal Vice Presidency Unit. And it's a pleasure to be here and to join you all in Seoul for what I think is a very timely and practical conversation. So my role here today is to set the stage for the country overviews that will follow and to offer a framework that I hope will be useful regardless of where PEMNA member countries currently sit on their digital transformation journeys. So some countries may be exploring AI adoption and others may still be consolidating the foundations of their systems that make digital treasury operations possible, and this presentation is designed to speak to both. So here is what we'll cover today. We'll start with the case for digital transformation in Treasury, the benefits and what is at stake. Then we'll take a look at a 4-pillar framework that the World Bank has applied to identify gaps and to sequence digital reforms. Then we'll move into AI and what kinds of AI are relevant to Treasury, risks that they introduce, and how countries are approaching governance. And then we'll close with sequencing and diagnostic, offering some practical insights. So, let's try to. Starting with the why, governments are under pressure to do more with less, to deliver services faster, reduce waste, and maintain public trust in how public funds are managed. Digital transformation in Treasury is one of the most powerful levers available. When done well, it can deliver 4 things that matter enormously for government effectiveness. First, faster and more reliable payments that build credibility and support service delivery. Second, real-time visibility across all government accounts and cash positions, allowing for better decision-making in real time. Third, stronger internal controls and reduced risk of fraud and misappropriation. And fourth, greater fiscal transparency and public trust. These are powerful outcomes, but they are not automatic. They only materialize when the regulatory and institutional conditions are right. And that's the central argument of my talk here today. The technology can enable these outcomes, but the regulatory and institutional framework will determine whether they are durable and whether they can work in practice. So it's also important to understand the risks that digital transformation presents and what that can mean for Treasury functions. So digitalization increases 3 things simultaneously: the speed of execution, the degree of system interdependence, and the impact of failure. So when operations are digital, a failure can be fast, systemic, and hard to reverse. Because Treasury sits at the center of how public money moves, in practice this can look like salaries and other types of payment being delayed, cash visibility disappearing, or public funds being misappropriated or misallocated. The stakes are immediate and visible in a way that failures in other government IT systems often are not. So more than a technology project, Treasury digitalization is a governance challenge. Treasury does not operate in isolation. It's connected to a complex network of actors and public entities, so central bank, line ministries, tax, customs, etc. And behind each of these connections sits a system architecture. Every one of these connections requires legal validity, secure data exchange, interoperability frameworks, and clear accountability. The critical insight here is that digitalization does not create these conditions, but it will expose their absence. So you can build the most sophisticated FMIS system in the world, but if there's no data sharing agreement between the Ministry of Finance or Budget and Planning and the central bank, the system cannot get the cash position data that it needs. So simply having the systems in place is not enough. It's the digital interface between them that will unlock the benefits: real-time reconciliation, cash visibility, and payment control. And this also illustrates a broader cultural challenge. So most manual-based Treasury systems were historically designed as closed, siloed platforms and optimized for reactive processing and internal control. In a digital environment where the value of fiscal data increases dramatically when it can flow across institutions, that siloed design becomes a liability. So interoperability is not just a technical upgrade, it's also a governance redesign. And here's also the AI connection, and I'll come back to this later, but every spoke in this diagram is a data source. So AI tools deployed in Treasury will depend on data from every one of these institutions. And the governance challenge does not go away with that AI. In fact, it deepens. So the binding constraints on digital transformation and the gap between what makes digitalization promises and what it actually delivers are often human, because these issues are not simply automated into existence. So where do things typically go wrong? In our experience, vulnerabilities can cluster in 4 areas. First, governance. These are things like fragmented decision-making across the Ministry of Finance, central bank, and line ministries, unclear authority over payment systems, fiscal data and incident response. So when something goes wrong, nobody is sure who is responsible. Second, interoperability. Data exchange without common standards or access rules. For example, autonomous entities that prefer to keep their own commercial bank accounts because they want more flexibility. Third, legacy systems, so aging FMIS platforms, hybrid paper-digital workflows where nobody wants to fully commit to either, and security controls that were bolted on after the fact rather than designed in from the start. And fourth, legal and regulatory gaps. So unclear legal status of electronic payment instructions and e-signature on commitment approvals, inadequate or lack of data protection rules that cover payroll and supplier data, and staff who fear facing personal accountability risk when the legal basis for their digital actions is ambiguous. It's typical at this point for countries to have these foundational laws in place, but the more common gap will be operational. So data sharing agreements between institutions, access control policies that are inconsistent across systems, and interoperability protocols that were never really agreed upon. What is important is that these are not technical problems with technical solutions. They are governance and legal problems that require governance and legal responses. So here's a quick visual concept that can potentially be useful in practice. It's a matrix plotting technical readiness against institutional and legal readiness. And the goal is to be in the top right quadrant, where a country will have high technical readiness and high institutional readiness. And that is where systems will be sustainable, trusted, and legally enforceable. The danger zone, obviously, is in the bottom right, where you can have high technical readiness but low institutional readiness. And that's where countries end up when they invest heavily in FMIS or TSA technology without building the governance and legal foundations alongside it. The consequence is fragility, not efficiency. So, drawing on the World Bank's experience across its portfolio in assisting public sector digital reforms, 4 elements consistently emerge as critical enablers of sustainable digitalization. These 4 pillars are the building blocks of a strong enabling environment, and they can apply at every stage of digital maturity. Whether you are deepening TSA consolidation or preparing to deploy AI-assisted cash forecasting, the same 4 questions apply. Is the governance right? Is the infrastructure secure and interoperable? Does the legal framework support what you are trying to do? And do your people have the skills and the trust to use the system? So let me walk through these briefly. Governance is about who owns what, who decides what, and how disputes are resolved. In Treasury, the critical governance questions are, does the Ministry of Finance or Budget and Planning have a clear legal mandate to fully consolidate government accounts into the TSA, including autonomous agencies, subnational entities, and donor-funded projects? How are the roles between the ministry, the bank, and the line ministries defined and enforced? Is there an interagency steering body with real authority and legal mandate, not just a consultative role? And who owns the data at each node in the network that we just saw? The most common failure is that these questions are not answered at all, rather than being answered wrongly. In the second pillar, legal clarity is foundational and non-negotiable. The key legal instruments for Treasury digitalization include an e-transactions law that gives electronic payment orders and digital approvals full legal equivalence to paper, a TSA legal basis, data classification rules that distinguish between open fiscal data and confidential operational data, and data protection laws that apply to payroll, supplier, and beneficiary information, and cybersecurity legislation that classifies Treasury systems as critical national infrastructure. And one practical observation that I have mentioned before, many times the foundational legal instruments are already in place, but the more common and difficult challenge is the layer beneath the law. So the internal policies and protocols that translate legal permission into operational reality. Okay, pillar 3 and 4 are infrastructure and human capacity. These are deeply connected to the implementation, and they will determine what is legally and institutionally sound, if that works in practice. So on infrastructure, the key design for Treasury is technical interoperability and data security. Each connection in the network requires not just a technical interface, but a governance arrangement and a security architecture. Disaster recovery and business continuity must be legally mandated and technically tested. And on human capacity, the biggest challenge is usually change management. So the resistance to digital systems in Treasury, and that tends to come not from senior officials, but from mid-level accountants and payment controllers who have exercised discretion over paper-based processes for years. So automation can feel to them like a loss of professional judgment. Effective change management will address that directly through peer learning, early wins, and clear communication that system-based controls improve rather than replace professional accountability. With these 4 pillars in mind, I want to turn to the new talk of the town, artificial intelligence. So before getting into AI governance, it helps to take a step back and to put the current moment in perspective. AI is not a recent invention. The field has existed for decades, and many of the tools most relevant to Treasury are forms of narrow, task-specific AI that have been used in private financial institutions for several years. What has changed more recently is the arrival and the rapid adoption of generative AI, large language models trained on vast amounts of diverse, unstructured data that are capable of generating new content. As you can see from the diagram on this slide, generative AI is only a subset of a much broader field. So what does AI actually look like in Treasury context? In the traditional concept of AI, and that is the type that is most relevant to where most treasuries will find themselves today, you can have tools like payment anomaly detection, which flag unusual transactions for human review, cash flow forecasting models, which use historical fiscal data to project liquidity needs, and automated reconciliation, which matches payment records across systems without manual intervention. At the more experimental end of the AI landscape, generative AI opens up different possibilities. So for example, natural language interfaces for querying fiscal data, AI-assisted drafting of budget narratives and audit reports, or even summarization functions. These are still a bit more experimental, and they carry a different and more complex risk profile. So what are these risks? Opacity is when the model produces an output, but the reasoning is not transparent. This is linked to the hardship in defining explainability of AI. With AI, you cannot often audit why a model flagged a payment as anomalous and held it that way. There is also bias. If an anomaly detection model is trained on historical payment data that reflects past errors or institutional patterns, it can systematically flag certain supplier types or geographic regions incorrectly. Model drift, which occurs when a forecasting model that was accurate at the time of deployment becomes unreliable as fiscal patterns change or as data becomes outdated. Hallucination, which is often a concern, and I do want to note here that hallucination is more tied to generative AI rather than the narrow type of AI. Hallucination is when the AI model presents its outputs with equal confidence regardless of accuracy. And accountability gaps. When AI-assisted decisions go wrong, and there is no clear assignment of responsibility. So I'm listing these risks here not to avoid the use of AI, but to ensure that governance and legal frameworks are ready before deploying it, regardless of which type of AI you are deploying. Governance frameworks should be calibrated to capture specific risks, but also designed to evolve as the risk landscape for AI is not static. I want to move on to how countries are approaching AI regulation. So there are 4 broad approaches to AI governance. Given that AI is a cross-cutting theme, AI regulation is developing along 2 tracks simultaneously. You can have horizontal frameworks that apply across all sectors, and sectoral approaches tailored to specific industries. So for Treasury and Finance Ministry officials, this means that you will increasingly need to navigate both. A horizontal AI law may set the overarching obligations, while your central bank or financial regulator may issue sector-specific guidance that sits beneath the overarching law. So the first type listed here, industry self-governance, is what is seen through voluntary codes of conduct, ethics councils, and other policies that are adopted at the organizational level. In soft law and international standards, you have national or international AI principles, ethics frameworks, and technical standards that are not legally binding but carry significant normative weight. 2 frameworks here deserve particular mention. The OECD AI principles, adopted in 2019 and now endorsed by over 15 countries, including many in Asia, established the first intergovernmental standard on trustworthy AI. The NIST AI risk management framework also provides a structured approach to identifying, assessing, and managing AI risks across the AI lifecycle. And the ISO or IEC 42001 standard on AI management systems also provides an auditable governance framework that is relevant for AI vendor procurement requirements, so for auditing purposes both internally and externally. Regulatory sandboxes are a different way where you have controlled testing environments under regulatory oversight, and they can be useful depending on the context for piloting AI rules in Treasury before full deployment. And finally, hard law or binding legislation. And this is where the momentum is accelerating. We have the EU AI Act, which you will hear more about in the next presentation, as the most comprehensive horizontal example to date. You have sectoral financial regulators layering additional guidance on top. So for example, Germany's Federal Financial Supervisory Authority issued specific guidance on AI discrimination risk in the financial sector. Korea's AI Basic Act, enacted this year, takes a similar approach as the EU law in terms of having a tiered horizontal approach for risking different types of AI. And the practical implication is that the regulatory landscapes that your institutions will navigate is not one framework, but often a layered one. The good news is that you don't need a separate framework for AI. So the same 4 pillars that I mentioned earlier can extend naturally. In terms of governance, you can add AI use policies for Treasury operations, risk tiering of AI applications, distinguishing between lower risk and higher risk tools, and clear accountability for model outputs. The NIST AI risk management framework could be a useful reference here. In infrastructure, you can think about things like model hosting and compute, audit trails for AI-assisted decisions, and model monitoring and drift detection. In legal and regulatory, those are the 4 types of governance that I was talking before, and you can add to your foundational regulatory basis, a legal basis for AI-assisted decisions, ensuring that there is explainability and auditability obligations in alignment with the national AI law or the relevant international frameworks. On the human capacity level, you can make sure that there is AI literacy for Treasury and line ministry staff, skills for model oversight, and the ability to question an AI output rather than accept it uncritically. So countries that have built strong foundations across these 4 pillars for basic digitalization are the ones best positioned to adopt AI responsibly. So this brings me to sequencing and diagnostics. The sequencing logic here has 2 principles: internal before external and phased implementation. The 5 steps on the left column follow a deliberate order where legal and governance should be secured first, core internal systems second, interagency interoperability third, external transparency interfaces fourth, and finally AI tools fifth, once all the foundations beneath them are solid. The reason AI sits at the step 5 is because AI tools are only as reliable as the data governance and institutional accountability of everything beneath them. So deploying AI cache forecasting on an FMIS with data quality problems does not just produce bad outputs, it produces confident-looking bad outputs, which are harder to catch and more dangerous than obvious errors. And that's what the diagnostics column here addresses. So before deploying an AI tool in Treasury, these questions can help ensure data availability and data quality. For example, is the data feeding into the AI tools complete, consistent, and regularly updated across all the connected institutions? Are data quality standards defined and enforced at each source, or is that just assumed? Are there known gaps or legacy data quality problems in the FMIS or TSA that could silently corrupt model outputs? And is there a human oversight requirement in place? Are model outputs auditable, and is accountability for AI-assisted decisions clearly assigned? So bringing a little bit of grounding, the 5 sequencing steps that I mentioned do not occur in practice in that way, in such a fixed way. And in practice, what you may have is a scenario where all of these things are kind of happening at the same time. So how to apply a different framework to these steps to ensure that you have all of these steps moving at the same time. A quick framework here based on quick wins and foundational reforms can help to assess this. So these are not strictly sequential, and work across all 3 levels can begin simultaneously, even if the timelines between them differ. So at the base are the foundational reforms, and these typically take years to happen because they require legislative action and sustained institutional commitment. Sorry about that. On the second level, you have quick wins. And these are more actionable items that are achievable in 6 months without legislative change or major investments. So these can be role-based access controls, audit log activations, or a rapid legal gap assessment. Also, digital literacy sessions for key staff. At the apex, you can consider AI readiness. So that includes things like risk tiering of specific AI applications, procurement requirements for vendors, including explainability and bias testing, and potentially regulatory sandbox designs for AI piloting. So the quick wins reduce the immediate risk and build trust, but foundational reforms determine whether the digitalization is legally sound, institutionally durable, and genuinely ready for AI. To close, I want to leave you with 5 takeaways. Technology follows governance. Digital transformation in Treasury is a governance and legal reform first, right? Regulatory frameworks are a precondition, not an afterthought. So think data sharing agreements, access policies, and interoperability protocols. Sequencing is strategy. So internal foundations before external interfaces, governance and law before infrastructure, and infrastructure before AI. People and culture determine success. Remember, the binding constraint is often human. Change management and sustained capacity building are not soft components. They are what determine whether the investment in technology will deliver its intended results. And finally, AI readiness starts now. The legal and governance foundations that you build for basic digital transformation are the same ones that will determine whether AI adoption is responsible or reckless. So build them with AI in mind. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from our country colleagues and to the discussion that will follow.